Interiors Profession in the New Normal, or IINN Webinar Series. This webinar series is curated by the Society of Interior Designers, Singapore, SIDS, and today's session is jointly supported by the Institute of Indian Interior Designers, IIID, and made possible by our main sponsor, GM2000. Today's webinar is entitled Topics Connected in Tropics, Designing for the Tropical South, on how Singapore and India connect over climate, culture, and craft. I'm Zhi Jie, your moderator for this afternoon, and we're delighted that you can join us. We are equally delighted to have a panel representing both Singaporean and Indian interior designers. Our keynote speakers for this afternoon are Mr. Peter Tay, Director, Peter Tay Studio, and Mr. Pinkish Shah, Founding Partner and Design Principal, S+PS Architects. Together with our panelists are Professor Keat Ong, President SIDS, Founder and Principal Keat Ong Design, as well as Ms. Jabeen Zacharias, President of IIID, Principal Jabeen Zacharias Architects. We also have Ms. Shilpa Gore-Shah, Founding Partner and Design Principal, S+PS Architects, and Ms. Hwee, Founder and Principal Lit Studio Private Limited. Hopefully by the end of today's session, we can draw on lessons from our panel and learn more about practicing both in India as well as in Singapore. To kick off this afternoon's program, it's now my pleasure to invite Professor Keat Ong, President SIDS, to say a few words. Professor Keat, please.
Hi, thank you, Zhi Jie. Zhi Jie has recently become our star moderator. Yeah, and first I would like to extend a warm welcome to my dear friend, the President of IIID, Ms. Jabeen, and our keynote speakers, Mr. Pinkish representing India, and my dear friend, Mr. Peter Tay representing Singapore, and our panelists, Ms. Shilpa, and my dear friend Hwee as well. And this is the inaugural webinar of the IINN series. And IINN stands for Insights into the Interiors Profession in the New Normal, as you can see from the screen right now. And it seeks to explore both the current situations as well as finding new solutions. The two I's and the two N's signify the dialogue that the two nations is about to have. And I think you would agree with me that this pandemic has turned every one of us from jet setters to couch potatoes. Sorry that it didn't rhyme, because I'm a designer, not a poet. And many of our physical activities have been significantly reduced, but in this world of information and data we live in today, nothing is stopping us from continuing our exchanges of information. And albeit in a virtual format though, I'm pretty sure many of us are watching more news than anything else now on TV and are pretty well informed of current situations in the world. Thus, series of webinars seek to gain insights into each of our country's interiors profession and from the mouth of top practitioners, leaders, and educators alike to allow an in-depth understanding and to learn from one another from an industry perspective. Last but not least, I would like to thank the teams from IIID and SIDS for making this joint webinar possible. So handing over to Zhi Jie now.
Thank you, Keat. It is now my pleasure to welcome Ms. Jabeen Zacharias, President IIID, to say a few words. Ms. Jabeen, please.
A warm good afternoon to all of you designers of India and Singapore. Greetings, especially from IIID. Congratulations, SIDS, on their initiative to start this webinar, and we are proud collaborators with you in this. Friends, these times are difficult, different, challenging, uncertain. The way these times play on the psyche and physique of all of us, each of us, and impacts us collectively and individually, I'm sure will be a topic of research for many years to come. how much ever we try to get into the bottom of things, introspect and contemplate. I'm sure the lessons, more than leaving conclusions at the end, will only leave more questions for us to ask and find answers. It is in this context that collaborations become important. We are all designers, and design, at its most elementary definition, is to find solution to existing situations and better it. And it is the birthright of everybody, not just a few elites. And this kind of recognition of the problems and the solutions which we can offer to the world is the crux or the reason why we need professional platforms like SIDS or IIID. To say a few words about IIID, we are almost 48 years old now, just coming into the Golden Jubilee. Almost 10,000 members. We span 33 chapters and centers across India and one in Dubai. We work closely with policymakers and designers and even trade students to collect their opinions and views on how specific problems can be addressed and offer it as solutions, and thus play a critical role in shaping our nation's design policy. Coming out of the confines of our office, joining hands to find problems and solutions which can solve them at the larger realms of society and the country is such a privilege for all of us. And now at this special situation, what we also find is we can't now depend upon the borders of even countries. We have to collaborate across and form ties across the world, because wherever you go, whatever you think, who we are finding are just human beings. There's only one client here, the Homo sapien. And that human being, rich or poor, that is secondary. He is a social animal with a DNA conditioned by climate, his locality, culture, all these things put together. What can make him happy? What can make his life worthwhile? How can we actually make this planet a beautiful space for him to live in? All these are larger questions which can be solved only by firm collaborations like we are now doing with Singapore. India and Singapore, the ties go way back. I think it's also true that we have around 300,000 Indian origin Singapore people, and we therefore have a lot to kind of think about for or from a common perspective. Way back when we had a movement like Look East, Singapore was the first country to collaborate with us. After all, the sun rises in the east. And it is high time that we take a lead in getting solutions for the problems which now kind of pose so much uncertainties across the globe. So let us collaborate beyond this webinar, far into future also, and look at solutions together. Unlearning together, learning together, redefining design together. That's what I hope for. Thank you so much and wish this webinar all the best.
Thank you, Ms. Jabeen. And hopefully by the end of this session, we can learn a bit more and see what are the possibilities to collaborate. It is now my pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker for today, celebrity designer and President Design Award 2014 winner, Mr. Peter Tay, Director Peter Tay Studio, to share his design philosophy and approach to interiors. Over to you, Peter.
Hi. Yeah. Hi everyone. Okay. I'll start with my presentation. Screen. Okay. Off this. So I'll start off with first. I think thanks everyone, including it's an opportunity to actually have this together with India. I think to me in India, it's honestly I've not been to India until now, but for me the impression of India has been always one of the best places because I always wanted to see the Chandrindra building. Designed by Le Corbusier together with Pierre Generate, as well as to see the Management Institute by Louis Kahn Architecture. Of course, besides in India, we have the architecture of Geoffrey Bawa, which is really relating to the tropics and how Geoffrey Bawa architecture has somehow influenced the way tropical architecture has arisen, not just in Singapore, but also in Bali. So a lot of the modern masters like Le Corbusier, Louis Kahn has actually embarked into India, which unfortunately in Singapore, we do not have architect of that era. Reason is because in Singapore, architecture was not an old city, but it was a city that was built, it was a city that started only in the early in the early period, where Singapore to me it's a tabula rasa city. So as Rem Koolhaas say, Singapore is where if you look at the landscape around the spaces, they are all artificial landscape. So it's what we call a tabula rasa city by Rem Koolhaas, which is rightly correct because it looks like almost an artificial city. But if you come to Singapore scape now, it looks like a city that has grown over time and it grows very naturally, that somehow green has actually overrun the architecture of it, that now we talk about green spaces. So for me, I felt India was a very good starting point, and how its architecture as well as its interior could also influence the way we start to design interior spaces. So honestly, the topic, because it's not just for designers and practitioners in Singapore, but also really is an interior design for the Indian society, the interior Indian society, the Society for Interior Designers in India. So, so basically, my topics were a little bit explained about not so much about my work, but I think for me very important is about my thinking and my philosophy until today. Where I started, and I started over the years until today. I start to actually mold and refine and start to think about what interior design is all about, starting about the ideology, the thinking behind. And as we go each day, I start to mold through each project. And each project has been almost a learning experience for me. And I'm still learning almost every day until today, right? So for me, design, this is the first slide that I want to say is that I took the reference, which is one of my also a favorite designer, besides he's just an architect, where he said ornamentation is a crime. Yeah. So to me, it becomes very powerful because as an interior designer, we are not here to so-called decorate the space. What does Aldo Luz means by ornamentation is a crime? So if you look at the next thing, the work of Aldo Luz, if you really study the work of Aldo Luz, because being the fact that he's an architect, but the fact that a lot of the work of Aldo Luz is not so much about architecture, but it's all about interior space. So somehow architecture has been dissolved into interior space, where interior space takes a prime role over architecture in a way. So sometimes it's very difficult because when we say a very nice interior, so is this interior formed by the architecture? Has architecture carved out the interior spaces? Or is the interior spaces that defines the architecture? And this was the notion that I have actually pushed myself over the years and start to understand. I wanted to redefine what interior space is all about, because as I mentioned, ornamentation is a crime. And this is my very first belief as I started my interior design. So to me, the work of Aldo Luz is about intimacy and spectatorship. Spectatorship is about how we see things and how we look at things. And for me, interior design is how I, as a designer, how I look into spaces, and not just about creating something that is of trend, of latest trend setting, or without any identity. So which you will see very quickly in a lot of my works later on. Unfortunately, I could not speak very long because usually if I give a talk, I usually talk about 2 hours to 3 hours about my work. But just because this is a very short 20 minutes, so a lot of the works I really could not explain, but I will just go as quickly as I can. So, so I just need to explain all this slowly in the first place, because to me, this is very important for me as interior design. To me, Walter Benjamin wrote this: to live is to leave traces. It's the recent birth of interior. So an interior space has to leave traces of the person who is living in the space. A good interior design is a space that reflects the personality of the owner living in the space. He leaves traces, he could leave footprints on the floor, but he could leave his own voices inside the inside spaces. And to me, interior spaces is about these voices of the owner who is living in this space. The voices could be quiet, the voices could be loud, the voices could be about he himself. And that's important. It's not about how the interior designer has designed the space. So the traces of the occupants leave an expression of an interior. The detective story that follows these traces come into being. So when we live inside an interior space, we create a story. And this storytelling is very important for me, because in every project we do is really about a storytelling. It's about storytelling. So this sentence becomes very important to me. There's an interior in the detective novel, but there can be a detective story of the interior itself. So it's very nice. Now we are looking ways in a very different way of the hidden mechanism by which space is constructed as an interior. So we see interior being really a composition of different spatial quality in a way. We don't see interior designer as this is what we're going to hang on the wall, this is what furniture we do, but we see this as almost what I call a layering. So walking into the interior is about a layering process. So a little known fragment of Le Corbusier, Urbanism, reads as follows. Luz told me one day, a cultivated man does not look out of his window. The window is made of ground glass. It is there only to let the light in and not to let the gaze pass through. So very important, what I'm trying to say is that when we have a window in the house, it's not about looking out, but it's all about having the light filtering into the interior space. So I'm reversing the process, because when you're inside the house, you look through the window, like some of the Le Coupe building, where you look out, you frame, you see the landscape, the crown of the green spaces. But right now, I'm looking at things very different. I'm saying, instead of looking out the glass, how about letting light filtering into the interior space? How about allowing the light to come in through the glass? So this is to reverse the whole notion where architecture has suddenly becomes interior, has suddenly becomes the architecture, architecture has suddenly becomes the interior spaces. So Lu observes that the smallest of a theatre box would be unbearable if one could not look out into the large space beyond, right? So, okay, so I just quickly run through all this, yeah. So to me, the last sentence is the space he created by Luz, or his space, assumes a dual character. So for me, even in my interior design and all my work, I would like to have this duality that's happening in my space. You know, to me, this duality has a sacred quality, but it also has a point of control. What do you mean by point of control? It freezes your movement inside the spaces. It let you stay into your interior space a little bit longer. That 5 minutes longer could help you to understand what space is all about. And that is very important to me, about holding me into the space, right? Yeah. All right, so we'll quickly show you some of my work, which I'll see next. So this is important as my brief. All right. Okay. So as the show me. That's okay. All right. No problem. Okay, so very quickly, I'll just show you my works in a very short. This is basically the work of a Spanish architect, and it's very important, as I mentioned, about what is interior and what is exterior space. So if you look at this space, it's very strange. It's almost like an interior space, but yet it was almost an exterior space. It's about the landscape that's reflecting on the reflecting water, that the water suddenly becomes almost like a ceiling, and also become where are the walls and where is the floor, the kind of openings. And it's exactly what Aldous was trying to create. Aldous was for me to really see what interior space and all about this layering, but that these spaces talks to you very directly, where the space create this intimacy that I'm talking about in a lot of Aldous work. The work intimacy becomes very important because it's about you living in the space, have an intimate relationship with not just the internal space, but as well as the external spaces that is being captured into the interior spaces. So it's all about, as I mentioned, it's all about, as Aldous said, a window created was not to view out, but it's also about having light to come into this space. So this is to show an example of how light is being reflected into the space. A Spanish architect who is not a known Spanish architect, but whose work has actually transcended what architects are doing right now. It's all about, creating this spatial quality. And this is looking at the work of how an interior space that he has done, that the white spaces becomes almost bare, where it becomes almost very intrinsic in a way. So what you can see is how the relationship of open spaces and inside spaces and starts to redefine for me exactly what this is the work of one of the architects where so basically, I will not explain, but actually this is a story which I wanted to tell. So this was basically one of the work, one of the spaces that I've been in Noishima, where it is really beautiful because it's almost like an interior space where an artist starts to work. So if you look at the image below, it's all about a water body that comes out from the floor, and it's a Japanese artist that allowed the water to actually flows out from the opening, and because the floor is uneven, the water starts to trickle down into the next house. So when you are inside this interior space, all you hear is about water coming out and water flowing out. And because of the opening, it's about the echo that is within the space. So that means the interior space was created almost like an art spaces. It's also about the birds that's flying past where the sound has been captured inside, the echoing of the sound, that somehow you are inside the space, but yet you are trapped by the senses, the tactility, the senses of sound within the space. So that is all about hearing and nothing else. And it's all about feeling of this water trickling out the space. So this is exactly how the space, where the floor and the ceiling and the wall become almost one element, but in a very sinuous way, where architecture has somehow, interior has actually become part of an architecture in a way. So this is actually in Teshima, which is near Noishima, designed by Sena Architect. So of course, this is the work of Peter Zumthor. I have to quickly go through. This is Louis Kang, Richard Serra's work. This is also the work that has influenced the way in my thinking as well, right? So this is the work of Sejima, if you go to see about glass reflection, and artist work in Noishima where light come into the space. So for me, this idea of seeing architecture that disappear, especially the work of Le Coupe, where about a material architecture that happens into a landscape spaces, the reflection, and suddenly this was actually an architecture that I did in Singapore. So this was basically a house where I've done the architecture where, to me, it's all about, the idea of using a BRC, this is just a fence, but it's about the tree that hugs against the fence. But it's an architecture where I created, where I have the swimming pool, which I've done, and this swimming pool actually reflects the interior space as well. So when you are across the pool on the lawn, you could see that the interior space has been reflected on the water, and the architecture appears to float above water. So this idea of lightness and heaviness at all starts to play in the form of the architecture. The architecture becomes a brutalist architecture, which I created was concrete surfaces, but more I wanted to say in tropic interior is all about the see-through spaces, the cross-ventilation space where window slides open, so you can have the cross-ventilation. So what you can see is basically this is from the outside of the house. So this is actually on the first level. So it is the best experience was what I have was this space after when the project was finished. Every time when I visited my client's space, I have seen people who's walking past, whether they are carrying the dogs or stopped or driving the car, they will all stop in front of this house and look from outside because they could see the interior reflected. So this becomes almost like a theater box that what Aldo Luz was trying to talk about. For me, I am the audience. This is a theater. The house suddenly becomes a theater box where it's a spectacle where it's not just about an architecture, an exterior space, but also an interior space that we also reflect through the inside spaces. So you can see that on the roof of this architecture was a reflective steel where I reflect the interior and the bottom has a water feature. So this design has this multiplicity that this interior and architecture duality starts to happen in a strange way. And it's also the way I designed the lighting that of the illumination within the space so that the lights looks as though it's actually, the treated steel has lights on the ceiling, but actually it's not because it's this idea of the reflection, you know, of the interior space. So if you look at the next slide, you could see how this reflection works. So this is actually the first floor driving in. So the architecture was created as this was the first floor. So you drive straight into the basement, but you have a center courtyard. And you can see the reflection that is actually carried, including the internal reflection into the space, including into the dining. So you have this multiple reflection and this layering that I was interested in. This layering becomes an unfolding of the story from even before entering the house. If you're not entering the house, but it could lead you through the spaces in a very strange way. So this is exactly, of this. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry. So I'll go back quickly again. So this is Yep, so you can see basically this is the idea of the reflection, how the water feature come into space. This is showing you the living spaces. You have a landscape in the center and that's where the dining. But I have created steps within the space. So this layering is not just a flat surface, but it's almost a progression. So this is how from the dining looking back into the living space, how the fans that create the space. So the next project was basically, maybe I can skip those projects that I think it's, this is basically in Hong Kong, where it's actually the Christian Dada boutique as well as the Richard Mille office, but you can see how the whole idea of creating a volume within a volume. I quickly go. This is a project in Sentosa Oceanfront. I will basically explain those projects that I think is related to this topic. So anyway, this is to show the idea how I have created the reflection within the space of a penthouse in Sentosa, right? Yeah, Oceanfront. Okay, and this is important. This is actually a project that I've done in I exhibited in Venice Biennale. So it's in the Biennale in 2014 where Rem Koolhaas was a curator. So it's very interesting is that when I designed this space, so this is actually, that's extra board. I mean, that's people from Singapore who've been into the space. So what you can see is actually really, it's all about, I'm redefining what architecture and interior. So in this volume, what I did was I did a garden in the center, and this is actually a glass box where you look into the inside spaces, look into the inside spaces. So from the outside, it's very strange. It's like you look in, you want to see the inside of the house, but when you look in, you see a garden spaces. So are you the inside of the house and are you on the outside? Are you inside or outside the house? So inside the box does not mean it has to be an interior of a house. It's actually a garden space. So on the left and right are mirror. So if you are standing within the space, you could see how I use the light illumination, but you can see this duality that I was talking about. It was this idea of, are we inside or are we outside? It's exactly what Aldo Luz was saying. Are we doing window just to look out, or are we having light to come into the space? And I started to create this, and of course, on the end is actually a slide of all my projects, which is my identity of reflection. And that's why in all my projects, that's for the Indian design, Indian side, that a lot of my projects in Singapore has to do with reflection, because for me, this reflection becomes very important. It reflects not just about anything, but it also reflects about my life that I've been through, and as well as the thinking and how my life, where I met an accident, and how it actually changed and reflect and also affect my design thinking as well. So you could see how I have actually shown you in Venice Biennale, this is what I did, and it's a bit difficult because I have to mess with rank Fuhas and construct. Okay, this is the next project, which is important. It was actually a project where it's actually an old houses and a new glass extension that was created. What was exciting for me was I created a vertical green that is actually inside the house. But if you're walking the glass bridge, so from the old house walking the glass bridge, so across the glass bridge, this is the new glass extension, which is a new living space. But what was interesting is that, I remember one day in the morning when I went to the site, it was 7 a.m. in the morning. What was the most beautiful was I didn't see the owner. What was most beautiful is when I was walking on the bridge, there was this butterfly that flies out from these green spaces. And this butterfly starts to move around me for 2 loops. And I could see the butterfly was happy. And that was the most beautiful moment in my whole design history for me, that I have designed a space for a butterfly. And the butterfly, there was this happiness of the butterfly that flows through the space. And to me, it becomes really what a tropical interior is all about. It's not just about a human being in all the space. So what you can see, if you can see, it's about the reflection within the space that I created. So I designed how the external and how the green works within the space, the happiness of the kids, which is exactly what Singapore is all about doing it. And this was basically design where, if you look at the design, it's not just one spaces. It's not like 3-story, but it's actually 1 story when I'm sitting down, but you can see the multiple reflection, because I not only have steel ceiling on the floor, I have ceiling on the top as well. So you could see that from a single space of 3 meters, it suddenly became a 9-meter space. And this was basically how the architecture that was created for the volume. So what you can see is actually the ceiling where how I capture the green into the space. So the green becomes part of the inside spaces. So, okay, I'll quickly go faster a bit. This was a house where I start to work around the idea of a house in a forest. So I designed the landscaping as well, right? And this is one of the house I worked with Richard Meyer, architect. His only first house in Asia. So it was me and Richard Meyer. So it was basically how the interior, but if you could see the Richard Meyer, how the skylight come into the space, and how I work as an architecture volume and interior architecture space that defines the space. This was a house that I'm designing in Bali now, Uluwuntu, where you have the swimming pool on the higher floor that swims the space. So I'm doing the architecture as well as the interior. So you could see this is exactly just above the hilltop, and how the bedrooms relate to the pool, and how you have framing of the ocean view as well, right? These are houses that I've done. And this was my work. Very important is about the work that I've done when I'm studying in London. So I did my architecture at the AA in London. So it was one of the best for me to study in that school. Reason is because I'm not doing architecture. I was going to site like this, where I started to understand site. I was doing sketches that sketches the site, but see the world as a very different kind of universe. So this was very quickly some of the projects that I'm working. I will quickly go through, I think my time is almost up, but I'll show you this is the work that I'm working on in Cambodia, which is actually almost like a church. It's a church for the poor, for the people who are suffering, who are very poor, who has no homes to stay. But it was a church that I designed where the architecture allowed the light to filter through the space. It's sitting on a piece of land. And this is the senses that when you walk through the whole space. So this is the feeling that I'm doing. This is the interior notion of the church that I'm doing, about a transition of space, about a layering, about the landscaping and how the green and how the light filter through the space. Sorry, that's the president. Okay, so these are some of the projects that I've completed. This was Singer Wang Li Hong Taipei office, which I just completed last year very quickly. Yeah, so okay, and is my time's up? I think so, yeah. Okay, but I have maybe, let me see, I have some more work. Show me. Okay, so I'll just quickly give me a few more minutes and then I will end the talk. Okay, so what we see is basically, for me, is these are some of the projects that I've completed. I mean, some of them you've seen, but so this is a Louis Poussin boutique that I've done in Singapore, a restaurant, but it also has to do with the reflection that I was talking about. This is important. This is about, just now I mentioned about Aldo Luz is about the spectatorship and what a theater is all about. This was in Shanghai. It was a surrender boutique. I've done almost all the surrender boutique in Singapore, including the one in Marina Bay Sands and as well in Orchard. But this is actually a French colonial district. What was beautiful was in this street, it was about, you know, an architecture that was most fascinating to me. If you look at the architecture, it was a green that starts to creep around the building. It was the leaves that falls the space. It was this surface where the walls are cracking. And this is very meaningful to me. This architecture was very, very beautiful. It was an architecture that weathers over time and then it becomes this. So this was a church in the same district where the green starts to creep around the building and cover the spaces. So when I was designing this boutique, this is actually the street in Heng San Lu, and this was an architecture by Marabota. So of course, it's a 6-star hotel. The hotels were designed by Yabu Pushberg, and then for the downstairs, so this is exactly what Marabota did, which is almost like a museum he did in Japan as well. So if you notice, in the center they have a water body, but what is important is that at the first floor is actually the shops where I start to design the boutiques for surrender. But what was interesting was that these clothes were actually displayed 2 meters high, so that from outside it becomes almost like I am the audience without even going to the shop. This becomes almost like a theater for me. And what was interesting was I went to Paris, I went to the market and actually find this old wood from an old derelict house that they tear down all the old wood, and I bring it because this was a French colonial. So I start to understand the context. So you can see this is an old fireplace from France that I bring all the old wood paneling, and this was the interior. So this is where they carry the Tom Brown clothes, the Ralph Simmons brand and all this. So you could see how I have actually designed using old wood that relates the context. And these are old wood from old doors from Paris that was brought through the space. So this was the initial design that I actually did for Surrender in Singapore, where the whole idea was this old and the new starts to combining within the space. All right, yeah. So these are some of the work, a show flat where this I've done in Singapore, which is actually a penthouse architecture by Kerry Hill as well. Yeah, so very quickly. And I think, yeah, and that was the Manalo Blahnik boutique that I've done in Singapore, the Polyform showroom, the Armani Casa furniture showroom that I've done in Singapore, the Richard Mille workshop, a hotel in Bali that I'm designing at the moment. This is the Maxalto B&B showroom that I've done for space in Singapore. So you can see the look for the whole space, the Maxalto, show flats. Yeah, it is the show flats. So very quickly, this is a super penthouse in Singapore that is 21,000 square feet. It's bought by Dyson. Yeah, so this was actually the interior spaces that we have created for him. Yeah, and so that's all for my presentation. I think I cannot share more because of the time limit. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for sharing on the role of the ID and space and trying to condense so many projects into the time. It's now my pleasure to hand over the time for our second keynote speaker, award-winning designer and academic, Mr. Pinkish Shah, founding partner and design principal, S+PS Architects, to share on the design approach towards craft, climate, and culture in India. Over to you, Pinkish.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for that wonderful presentation, and thank you for the SIDS and the IID for hosting me today on behalf of S+PS Architects. Can you all see my screen?
We can see your camera, but not the screen.
Oh, okay. One moment. Let me share. Yes, is that better now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great. So I thought that this was a wonderful opportunity to kind of dig into things that India and Singapore share. And the obvious thing is, of course, the fact that we both lie in this kind of tropical belt. At least half of India does, not all of it. But there are a lot of things that we share in this kind of commonality that was once the earth. And the obvious things as kind of brought forth in the theme for today is, of course, culture, climate, and craft in some sense. And I would really like to kind of touch upon these very quickly to kind of actually see how they become important in our work and how they've actually been useful for shaping our designs. Culture is, of course, very important. Like Singapore is, India is also very kind of diverse and multicultural nation with a lot of different languages, cultures, and everything that happens. And as India progresses, modernizes, globalizes, it's very important for us that we don't lose who we are and what we are about. And I think the kind of particularities of who we are as a people and the kind of ways of life that have kind of existed is something that we're very interested in kind of carrying forth. And that oftentimes reflects in the way we design spaces for our clients to allow for these kind of lifestyles to continue. For example, the image on the left talks about a large joint family which had, 3 brothers living together with their families, and then 3 grandparents who were there. And it was a kind of a ritual every night to kind of sit down on this large kind of, in India, what we call a baitak, a kind of a seat where you could all put your feet up cross-legged, sit on that little swing, and kind of have these kind of conversations after dinner. And it also talks about the kind of heritage of where they come from. The wall behind them is actually fragments of stone carvings that come from their village, which is the kind of origin from which the family kind of comes from. And the one on the right, again, talks about a way of life, like I mentioned, about a family that was kind of insistent that they still prefer having a bath in a bucket, I mean, with this kind of quintessential lota, which Charles Eames called kind of the most beautiful object that one could find. I mean, an example of kind of great design. But it also talks about a way of life that seems to be very important for all of us. It talks about how you can minimize resources, how that one bucket is all that one needs, to kind of have a bath as against the kind of millions of liters we kind of waste for showers. So I think that's about kind of a way of life. Climate, of course, is the second one. And Peter has already kind of spoken a little bit about that. It kind of allows us for opening our doors up, allowing kind of natural light, natural breezes to actually come in. It allows for a kind of outdoor living where a large part of the year we are actually able to kind of conduct a lot of our activities outdoors. And open space and open to sky space has actually always been very important in the Indian and kind of the larger Southeast Asian subcontinent. So I think, for example, on the slide on the left, it kind of shows that the dining table is also kind of designed with wheels, which can actually kind of be rolled out in good weather, and you can actually have kind of outdoor dining. Or how nature kind of actually coexists with the kind of house that is there. And of course, the third being craft. Craft, again, I mean, India particularly has amazing craft traditions. Every kind of 200 kilometers, you kind of, drive through the country and you'll see fantastic changes in kind of material culture, food culture, fabric, garments, and all kinds of folk art traditions. And this is unlike a lot of other countries in the West. This is not something we believe should be restricted only to museums and kept in glass boxes, which you cannot touch and see, but these are very much living cultures. And there are actually hundreds and thousands of artisans and craftsmen across the country who are increasingly getting kind of marginalized as we kind of globalize. And it's important for us to see how we can actually bring them into the kind of purview of the work that we as professionals create. So the one on the left is actually a ready-made shadow puppet that's actually done out of leather. So this is actually a character from the Mahabharata. So there's actually these really large characters of all of these, but where we actually kind of used one here to actually suggest a certain directionality. The one in the middle is a tribal artist, a Gond artist, who we actually commissioned to create kind of the headboard of a certain kind of piece within this bedroom. And of course, there's also urban craft. I mean, craft is not necessarily of the kind of old and the ancient, but as large cities kind of are getting formed, we actually see a lot of these abilities that have been inherent to a lot of these artisans getting transformed in different ways to be able to kind of serve a completely different purpose. So I think it's very important in our work to actually be able to sustain a lot of these craftsmen and livelihoods that would and not allow for these kind of craft traditions to die out. So besides culture, climate, and craft, as a practice, it's really, really important for us to actually be looking at ideas. And that's something that's been central to our work since a long, long time. So our strategy has always been to kind of study what we call the various desire lines on a site. So there's a lot of kind of negotiation that needs to be done, what may apparently seem to be conflictive demands between climate, clients, authorities, the users, the consultants. And it's always important for us that we evolve an idea, a kind of central premise, so to speak, that incorporates all these forces. It brings together, it synthesizes, which is essentially the act of design, to bring all these kind of varied forces together into a kind of an idea. And then that idea, that concept is used to develop design at all the levels and scales. And it creates a kind of a unique architectural language for their project. We actually, pride ourselves to believe that we are not kind of actually kind of repeating ourselves too much, but in a sense that every project is a kind of tabula rasa, so to speak, where we would try and kind of reinvent and retell the story of design through what the demands of the site, the particularities of the site, the stories of the clients are. And that's really what the project then becomes. We're going to quickly go through 3 projects. So like I mentioned, none of these are kind of isolated. All these 3 aspects and more actually overlap. But just to kind of make a point, each of these projects, we're showing you 3 residential projects, center themselves primarily around one of these themes. This one, of course, being craft. This is for a couple that's really interested in kind of of Indian crafts and fabrics in some sense. And the house is kind of in a kind of a tall apartment building, 2 apartments that have been combined together. One side, of course, is the right side is the children's, and the left side becomes the master suite with the kitchen, and the living dining is actually in the center. But what really kind of unfolds beyond that plan is kind of a fairly kind of varied play of materials and objects, artifacts, furniture, all contained within kind of this space. you will see, of course, that it's driven by the collection of objects that the family has, collected over a lot of years. And they pride themselves in actually keeping a lot of these traditions alive. For example, the painting you see on the left side is the only kind of family that is left in India, in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, who actually creates that kind of folk artwork. All the kind of pride they take in eating their food every day in these kind of bronze utensils, which kind of, as they're used every day, actually kind of come into their own, because they kind of pick up that idea of the tarnish or the kind of day-to-day wear and tear that you kind of see. But beyond all of this, and of course, this is of course their bits and pieces of their collection of kind of elephants, or the image on the right is actually work which was done by a Bengal artist in a folk tradition called Patua, where it actually shows people, urban people, having a good time over a few drinks, for example. But in a sense, the center of the house is around this kind of platform, which is raised slightly above the ground. It's the first thing you encounter as soon as you enter, and takes on multiple roles as seasons progress, as kind of weeks and days goes on. So it actually is used in kind of multiple ways. This one shows the same space actually used for what they have is like card parties, where they actually sit together on the ground with friends and everybody. So there's a mattress with pillows. You've seen kind of the pillows have actually changed as well, and it becomes a completely different mood and environment over there. Or this is during a festival. This becomes kind of an altar for the god. This is during Ganesh Chaturthi festival, and suddenly it kind of becomes like an altar-like space. Or this is where the lady of the house is actually a collector of Indian textiles and saris, and this is kind of a little kind of show she held with the traditional kind of bangle maker, where they actually kind of sit on the floor and the bangle maker is actually explaining the craft and how he kind of makes these, and then the women actually kind of partake in buying. So it's very much about these kind of conditions and traditions that are very particular, which we think are important to kind of keep alive. The rest of the photos, of course, show the kind of collections of objects and artifacts, like I mentioned, within this kind of space. Again, like Peter, we've got these mirrors which you can see on the beams, which kind of cut that space across, trying to kind of actually erase them to kind of feel that continuity of space across. And it gets this beautiful kind of evening light that floods the space, really calling out all the kind of rich materials which are there. This is the master bedroom suite. The back wall is again a traditional art form done with mud and lime paste, which is kind of hand applied, and it's kind of a commissioned work. And this is the kind of their walk-in closet, or what the lady of the house actually prefers to call her sari library in some sense. And she's actually got this fantastic collection of saris from all over the country, along with textiles. So there was actually a need, we thought, to actually respond to that space in some sense. And the idea for that really came from this storytelling box, which is actually called the Coward, which is a storytelling device which slowly, gradually opens itself out and tells the stories. And these tell everything from myths to kind of contemporary tales. And that's really what is kind of happening here. Here you see the two traditional Coward artists who we actually gotten to kind of do the work right here itself in the house. And it becomes a story of the lady itself. So the panel on the left shows the lady in a kind of a sari shop, and then it shows the different places she's collected her saris from. The top center, of course, being Varanasi, the right hand side being Jagannath Puri, the left bottom being Kutch in Bhuj, and the middle one being kind of Bengal, and so to speak. And the bottom right is kind of her wardrobe itself, her sari library, and it becomes key. It's like what they would call Priya ki kahani, which is Priya's story, and in that her story gets kind of a modern tale gets captured into this kind of box of which is kind of the collection box. And like the cupboard, it also kind of opens up in kind of these different ways. It kind of flaps open or comes out like a drawer. There's a double fold. So it becomes a really kind of interesting artifact toy, just like the original kind of cupboard is. I will run through some of the other. This is, of course, the master bedroom using locally available stones. The powder room has this kind of very interesting wall panel, which is done out of, again, a traditional technique called tikri, which is metal foil working into that. And of course, this becomes the puja, or the kind of the altar space, which is used on an everyday basis within the house. With on the right side, you see a kind of sliding door panel, which has this really intricate hand-done work, which is called sanji. This is something we think technology can do very easily, which is like through a laser cut, but there are actually craftsmen in India who would use a tiny little scissor and kind of, do these fantastically intricate panels over a period of few days. And we think it's kind of important to keep these traditions alive. The second, of course, is kind of climate, and we're looking at a house we were involved in very early on in the project, before the building actually kind of came up. And if you look at urban centers and urban cities today, we are increasingly kind of retreating into these cocoons, which are absolutely kind of isolated and sanitized in some sense, which don't allow for us to interact with the outdoors at all. And it was very, very important for us to actually create a situation where we could offer an alternative to urban living here. So these are the red kind of crosses actually indicate the two slabs that we actually got removed from what was actually planned. So we, in kind of in a Mumbai metropolis kind of situation, this is valuable real estate. We actually asked for it to be removed. And if you really see the plan on the lower level, this is a duplex. The gray actually indicates the part that is actually enclosed. So it's kind of a fairly small, tight kind of space. And what we've really done is that you can actually open up the windows or the doors, so to speak, completely, where you don't even see them in the experience of that space. And the space completely opens itself out to create this kind of fantastic cross ventilation across. So you kind of don't end up using air conditioning most of the times. Again, lessons learned from some of the masters like Jeffrey Bawa and all of that. And you surround yourself as a way to kind of negotiate the city with a buffer of green all around you. And that's really what allows you to kind of deal with the chaos of the city. So in this case, particularly, this entire kind of space is wrapped in this kind of a wooden box that kind of pulls these kind of two spaces together. And that's really the kind of wooden box, which is made to undergo a lot of cuts and folds and dents, where it really begins to articulate itself into a kind of a wrapper that envelopes this double height space. And that's really kind of the section that happens through. So the middle slab that you see is got the bedroom, the master bedroom above it, and the living space below it. And on both sides is basically the double heights of this space. So this wooden wrapper is not kind of completely flat. Again, to kind of tap into the kind of craftsmen that we have, all of this is done in solid wood, and it is also kind of crafted by hand, where we've actually got these kind of multiple pieces of solid wood in like 6 different widths, which have both convex and concavely carved surfaces. So as light hits that surface, as you walk underneath your feet, you're actually feeling these kind of shallow bumps or valleys, and it kind of creates this really, really tactile and haptic space within. So this is a quick kind of run through the space. This is kind of the entrance as soon as you kind of walk into the house. And as soon as you kind of enter, you would see that the space is completely open. This is in its kind of completely open form, where you actually don't see any kind of enclosure mechanisms, so to speak. And all you see is kind of bits and pieces of greenery and places you can actually go out and occupy. This is kind of experiments on the actual slab that we had cast, which is actually like a poured in place concrete ceiling, which is kind of made of these little blocks. The owner is kind of an engineer and really prided himself on his concrete work. So it was kind of a way for him to demonstrate his craft in some sense. And the space actually gets surrounded by greenery all around. We designed these vertical columns over here, which actually, bring nature within, again, flooding the space with light, greenery, breezes through the space. So to have something like this in the city would kind of really be really special. And of course, the center, there is this kind of staircase that leads you up. A beautifully kind of crafted staircase, part in solid, part in kind of plates, which is this triangular section that kind of continuously tapers to become an interesting thing. So you have two kind of leaves, one from the top, one from the bottom, both cantilevered, which kind of hold that staircase. But again, the idea of nature then is pulled back right into the center, through a kind of a more simulated kind of sense, with the carved kind of lotus leaves, which are as a kind of an offering below what was this kind of specially commissioned artwork of a famous kind of and much revered god who the family kind of believed in. And some of those offerings actually kind of then, in this kind of simulated sense, spill over into this staircase as well, where the artist in kind of almost a kind of an impulsive moment ended up drawing these beautiful frangipani flowers onto the wooden treads as well. So this wooden box continues upstairs as well. This becomes the master bedroom where this continues, and again the kind of greenery that envelopes you around continues, and what could be like a sitting space or a yoga space can open up and become like a two-person jacuzzi as well in this case. And these kind of columns of green help negotiate the neighbors who are just outside us. On the top floor, it's a very interesting family structure, just three of them, this really large house. And the brief to us really was that please make everything openable. So we want to see more of each other and we don't get kind of lost in this old house. So what we've actually done, the kind of pochade black is actually where we've contained all the solid servant spaces like the toilets, wardrobes and everything. And the rest actually becomes open in such a way that when these kind of partitions disappear between these spaces, you can actually see these spaces beginning to kind of talk to each other, and that people can actually choose to communicate at will, as in what their desires are. So this is of course the family room on the upper floor, on the 10th floor. These are those two kind of large containers that hold the kind of service spaces together. And on the right side, you see what is kind of actually a wall then disappears, and you actually kind of open up that entire space to kind of the outside. So the ability to create that connection is at will. Here you can see the son's room, where the bed was actually seen as this kind of sculpture that's placed within this very kind of quiet, neutral, white kind of space. So his desk and bed are actually able to rotate more out of being able to create relationships, like I mentioned, to the spaces outside. And you can see the back layer where the white and the kind of antique gold partitions actually are sliding and moving to be able to create a variety of relationships between spaces to enable the family to actually communicate with each other at will. These are some of the details. The ceiling is actually like a raw black metal plate which picks up on those folds, and the kind of the diagonal is again picked up in the floor through this kind of inlay of brass. And this becomes a family room where the kind of wooden lattice partition or the kind of antique gold brass kind of cabinet again works with that kind of very rich Indian kind of material palette. And of course, a lot of kind of interesting and nuanced kind of details all across the house. So this is the third kind of and the final project. I'm going to run through this really quickly. Culture is always understood to be traditional and understood largely to unfortunately be static, but culture rarely is, and it's something that's always in evolution, always kind of in a continual process of reinvention. And culture is also that what contemporary society kind of produces. So and unfortunately not all of it that contemporary society produces as culture is good. One of those of course is the waste that we produce as a society, and both India, these are statistics particularly to do with India, and in Mumbai you can see the kind of phenomenal amount of waste that is produced by us as a society. And when this project was actually designed, we were really concerned about is it possible for architects to even do something about this. So is waste a problem, or is it really a resource? And I think that was kind of the big question that we were looking at ourselves. And we were trying to rephrase the question that can architecture change our negative perception to waste? Especially in India, it is seen as kind of not really kind of nice. It's seen as ritually and hygienically impure. It evokes disgust and repression. So we were actually wondering that is there a way to actually change this relationship? And I think the answer was found in the fact that can we actually insert this into the cycle of cultural production, and through that, it can actually transform this ambivalent relationship that society has, contemporary society has with waste. And what does that really mean? And what does putting it into the kind of cycle of cultural production really mean? So there were a lot of artists in the kind of the West who were actually doing this in the kind of 50s and 60s. For example, Louis Nevelson in New York was walking the streets, picking up trash disposed by people and kind of assembling these really large kind of installations and sculptures, which he would paint black or gold or white. Or Richard Hamilton actually, using the idea of collage to actually pulling together disparate and kind of diverse influences and into kind of one image, oftentimes kind of clashing with each other. And we thought that's really kind of the tool that one could really use to kind of do this. And in Mumbai, especially where this house is cited, it's not really something new. I mean, we see waste being upcycled and recycled on a continual basis in our informal societies and in our informal settlements all around the city. And is there something that we as a society can actually learn from that? And that was really kind of the crux of what this house is about. So the house is actually situated in Navi Mumbai, which is the extended new kind of Mumbai, which is there. And it's atop this hill in some sense on these two spurs. And it kind of lies at one edge of those. And, one would think that when you get this chance to build on top of a hill, it'd be this fantastic thing with the views all around. But when we actually visited, we actually realized that there was a building on the right of us, the building on the left of us, and something about to come in front of us. So the ability to actually build something, was actually not there. I mean, in terms of these kind of outward views in any way. So that quickly allowed us to decide a scheme where we're essentially looking inward. And we kind of decided on this central courtyard as an idea where the house actually kind of gathers around, where here like a 3 generations of one family kind of actually came together around that kind of courtyard. These are some of the early study models. And what quickly emerged is this kind of sense of a frame that is in concrete. It's kind of the continuity that kind of happens all through the different parts of the building. And within this is actually this grouping of elements, these grouping of different materials and elements that come together. And the kind of the shell, the concrete shell actually holds all these kind of disparate objects, much like a cabinet of curiosities within that. So these are some of the early kind of renders about trying to look at how we can recycle material, right from kind of old windows to metal sheets to pipe to stone. And this is like a little video just kind of showing you a little sense of the kind of location of the project. idea of the traditional Indian courtyard. Like I mentioned, great climatically, great socially, and it kind of allows for a variety of uses and interactions for the family to actually come together around. So this is kind of the evolution of that kind of front in some sense. So this was what we had projected earlier, and this is what actually happened, and it was kind of quite fantastic. Actually, the whole evolution of this. Our client was kind of completely kind of sold into this idea, and more than us, he was like really excited. He would go every weekend in spite of being this really busy, business kind of owner, really running this really large group of companies. He would kind of go and discover places to find recycled material from. And this was in a kind of recycling yard in Mumbai called Dotaki, where the waste of the entire city actually kind of comes here to be recycled. And we, over 2 or 3 kind of visits, picked up these kind of interesting doors and windows, all of them, detailed, documented, measured, and then kind of figured out a way to actually put this together. And I think what has been incredible over here is that, a lot of kind of our modernist training, which kind of, talks to us about that you kind of go onto a site fully prepared, was something we really had to question, because that's something we used to do as a firm, that we would like really kind of have these really detailed drawings. But here we had to kind of throw all of that out of the window, because you're actually talking to the craftsmen and talking to the carpenters there, who are actually much more, used to dealing with windows like these traditional windows, to evolve a way to actually put these all together. And that's what really happens. It kind of comes together as this wonderful kind of collage of colors, materials, and it's kind of interesting, because the window doesn't work like a normal window, which is like you have a heavy wall with a hole within it, and you kind of put a window within. But here the window is actually like a curtain wall, and it's actually hung or suspended right in front of the slab. And these kind of little wall sections actually demonstrate how that really is happening. So there's a kind of great unfolding of materials and experiences that happens here. The stone you see on the left side is actually rock that came out of the earth as we were doing the foundations. The round drum of glass is actually a puja space for kind of the god, which is Krishna in this case. And the window which you see is actually kind of at a lower level, particularly because they squat on the ground and pray, so you're sitting on the ground. So it's at ground level that you begin to kind of look outside rather than from above. So there's all these kind of nuances that are actually kind of taken into consideration. This is a lift well within the house, which we've actually not enclosed. It's like these old lift wells that you would find in the Fort district of Mumbai, the old kind of heart of town, where you just see this industrial mesh. So what we've done is we've taken this industrial mesh and really turned it around into something kind of far more interesting. This is actually taken from what is actually Sanji, which is what I showed earlier, the cut work that artisans do. And this is a traditional craft of Mathura. And the house actually houses Krishna believers. The house is actually called Kanha, which means Krishna. So we actually took tales from Krishna's life and all the kind of myths and stories that happen, and use those kind of motifs as a way to kind of convert what is seen as something that's decorative into something what is normally seen as very industrial. The mesh is actually a very industrial product, and so this is absolutely kind of hand woven by this brilliant Danish Indian kind of collaboration, which is there working out of Bangalore. So very interesting over here. Again, this is of course just going to quickly take you through the house. This is the staircase. You come up to the first floor. So you enter into this really dark, thin kind of long space, and then you emerge, and the kind of light finds itself on the upper level, which is the first floor. And the courtyard is actually at the first floor of the house. This is the living room with kind of about 14.5 feet height, with the same windows from inside. All of these windows are actually operable. You can open and close any one of them. there are many, many interesting stories about a lot of things, the glass, the hardware, the chairs, but I'm kind of going to refrain myself from going into all of these kind of millions of stories over here. The floor again is kind of hand inlaid, which one kind of, we could have got this kind of laser cut, the technology actually exists, but this is the work of a single craftsman who worked for like 45 days straight, inlaying these kind of intricate pieces of stone and brass into kind of the floor here, you know. And of course the courtyard, like I kind of mentioned, and this is kind of where the family comes together. The courtyard is actually on the first floor, and below it is a 50,000 liter rainwater harvesting tank. And the pipes that you see in front of this image is actually pipes. Some of them are real columns that hold up the house, but some of them with the spouts below actually channelize all this water from the roof to the rainwater harvesting tank. And in the monsoons, which, you know, we all kind of used to, it becomes this gushing kind of series of spouts and kind of becomes really, really interesting as a space. The panel in the front is actually made out of scrap metal that's been kind of put together from a scrapyard very near the site. And the void on the left side actually houses a sliver of a pool, which kind of becomes a little kind of waterfall that spills into the courtyard over here. So all this is, of course, done through a very intricately designed water management system, where the kind of desires and aspirations of a client, like pools and all, which one would see as kind of a wasteful thing in terms of usage of water, are carefully calibrated. So I think it's actually possible to do both. I don't think we need to be in the state of either or, but we can have and, like, both possibilities kind of exist. This is a kind of interesting, funky take on an Indian palace would have a room called the Sheesh Mahal, or the House of Mirrors. And this is kind of waste pieces of mirrors, all kind of put together, each individually kind of beveled on each side. So it creates this kind of absolutely crazy set of reflections within. Master bedroom, the bed back actually becomes a series of standard frames that you get for framing pictures and moldings and all of that. So we've kind of just taken that and kind of used this as a bed back for this 4-poster bed. Here you can see the layering from one room to the courtyard to the kind of living room across. So these kind of relationships, like I mentioned, are possible. And again, a thin plan, really, the building is really one room wide. So it kind of has this possibility for light from both ends, as well as kind of fantastic kind of cross ventilation that happens. This is again the client's kind of discovery in some sense of textile printing blocks, which take on kind of the back of this entire cupboard here. This is, of course, again, the house beginning to slowly be taken over by nature, like, you know, greenery kind of, you know, beginning to take over the house slowly and kind of make it disappear. So that's really the section of the house, which you can see the image on the left showing you the rainwater harvesting tank with the courtyard above it. And on the right side, it kind of shows you this little sliver of space, which is, you know, where light begins to come in through the rooftop over here. Just going to very quickly wrap up. This is the details of the house itself. Some very kind of interesting details. And that's the back side. That's the south facade, largely blank and screened with all this bamboo that kind of came out of the waste from the kind of construction stage. And you'll notice that little pavilion on the top, actually, both from within and from without. So it's actually constructed out of these load-bearing columns from a 100-plus-year-old building in Kerala, actually. So the wood actually is load-bearing, switches to a steel kind of column, and then kind of has this really kind of reflective steel roof with kind of a glass surrounding pavilion. So you can actually begin to enjoy the kind of fantastic views that open up from this elevated space on the top. So that's it from me, and sorry about that spilling over of the time, please.
Thank you so much, Pinkish. I think we appreciate and wanted, I think we understand the project a lot better with that sharing as well.
Thank you
It's
so
quite
much.
interesting also to see this common thread, right? So Peter was talking about reappropriating the French panels into the store at Surrender, and then you were looking at these traditional windows that go into the collage house. Right. So I think it's great to see similar strategies, and you talk about ventilation, cross-ventilation views, or no views in Peter's case. So maybe let's move on to the panelist discussion. So for our participants, if you have any questions for our keynote speakers or panelists later on, we'll try to find some time to answer. You can key them in the chat box, preferably if you could type it in English. I think some people have typed it in Hindi. Unfortunately, I'm not apt at reading and translating Hindi, so I will have to trouble everyone to type it in English. So let's go straight into the first question to the panel. And earlier on, Ms. Jabeen had mentioned about the role of the designer, the birthright, right? And how design is seen as a method to approach different complex issues. And Pinkish had talked about, who we are, the ways we live and how that affects the design. Peter had talked about traces, right? And how interiors and the spaces as a user, the traces that we leave behind the space as well. So maybe to the panel, as a designer, are there any issues or things that you're trying to attempt? Maybe in a commercial project you can't because you have to meet the client's brief and you have to explore certain elements. But maybe to the panel, are there other issues or global issues that Singapore and India both face that you think should be addressed or you wish you could address a bit more in your practice? So maybe I open this to the panelists. If the panelists can join us and on their cameras, and then maybe I open it to the floor, if anyone would like to address it first. Maybe if I can invite our IIID president, Ms. Jabeen, maybe if you'd like to share, if you think, as a designer, what birthright and what elements you think we should try to strive for and address a bit more. Yeah.
Today, when I look at what we should address, the long list what we learned in our architectural colleges seem to have not much of a relevance. The only thing which comes to my mind is architecture should be about gathering the basic needs and responding truthfully to it. When I say basic needs, we have to understand that man is a product of nature. So not only will he need, probably he himself is not aware of the needs. That's a big situation which we are facing today. Because of all the media, information technology, and a lot of algorithms which we feed into people's mind, what we think actually may not even be what we think, but thoughts which are planted into us to think in a particular way by huge companies who kind of manage our data. So we have to find ourselves and what our truthful basic needs are. We don't have the luxury of floating on myths or our till now beliefs. Take the truth by its horns and kind of respond to it. We know that there are 86% of world's population who is really struggling. And this COVID situation at least have proved that, we cannot be individual winners. The rich cannot win it alone. Countries cannot win it alone. But it is a win which we should share with everybody. So the care should be there. The approaches should be to be inclusive. And the solutions which we have to find out may have to be largely collaborative. One huge advantage which I think we have is that we have come out of the myths and we have to now think out of the box. Everything we learned is almost unlearned. So this gives us an opportunity to be completely lost so that we can discover ourselves. And when we do that, today's topic like climate, culture, craft, And craft particularly, we think that it is about an object or some kind of an art form, but no, it is also a philosophy and approach where we engage our heart, hand, and head together to come up with expressions of what we want and what we are. So that would be the basic approach which I think should be there. But then we have to be also a little bit more specific. COVID situations have changed the way in which we will now look at spaces. Homes are now going to be multitasking. They are our offices, they are our church, they are our everything. Therefore, when you are locked inside those spaces, the earlier objects which we thought as luxuries, like maybe an artifact and a craft or a lampshade, might be what would be source of life and inspiration for us. Office buildings, such things may go huge kind of change in definitions. Do we need, if we can work at from the home, do we really need these kind of office places? And what is aesthetics? The smell which we might have hated till today of that lotion or phenol might hold a lot of beauty and reassurance for us in future. So the way we experience our sensory experiences and our architectural spatial expressions and experiences are going to change. So we have to think out of the box and look at solutions which can really work boldly and beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I agree. I think in this moment of COVID-19, everyone is really pausing and reconsidering, right, in terms of their values, what they hope to achieve. Maybe they realize they can actually do without the excess as well. Yeah. Maybe the rest of the panel, Professor Keat, do you have any thoughts on this?
Okay, I think firstly, I start with, I think there are usually two polarities I feel in design today. I think the extreme pole, one side of it are the philosophical thinker, reminiscent of romanticism, whereby we can see people bringing in more tactile stuff, into the environment and things like that. And also the other polarity are the designers that think that they are problem solvers alone. So these are the client-centric designers that we've seen a lot in the market nowadays. But I'm not saying that any of this polarity is right or wrong. But what I'm saying is that with the new normal, somehow I think it brings things into a clearer perspective now. And I'm not sure about India, but in Singapore, designer has been, in the past few months, has been listed as one of the champions for the non-essential profession, when it comes to war situation like what it is now. But of course, I think the whole fraternity in Singapore has to disagree to that, in that sense that we felt designers are a very flexible and adaptive profession, because at the end of the day, I think even decades ago, we have already classified designers as applied science, or rather design as an applied science rather than art, as an applied art rather than art alone. Yeah, so I think as an applied artist, somehow we are also solving issues and problems at the same time. And of course, I think why are designers surviving so well till today? Because we are also client-centric, because we address our work according to clients' brief. But of course, we put in our own input, as a profession, as a practitioner, and from our artistic roots, so that's how we apply our value to each project. And of course, I think coming back to responsibility, I think I've always told my student, I said traditionally we do have a responsibility, firstly for designer to the client, and then of course to the end user for sure, because end of the day the client may not be the end user unless we are talking about the residential project. If you are designing public spaces, your end user is much bigger than the owner themselves or the client themselves, who is just probably just a few people from a department. And then of course, I think one thing that I've been telling a lot of designers as well is that we have also to be responsible to ourselves, because this is the profession that will last a long a lifetime. Because why are we able to stay on even when you are old, with time to retire, you're still doing design, because I think this is what the power of passion has given us, you know. So you got to be responsible for yourself and not lose hope or lose your aspiration as you are doing your work. And then I think in this era, in the past few decades, one more thing has been really important, which is responsible to the environment. Even in the situation right now, I think this cannot be forgotten, because I think end of the day, I've just heard, seen one of the news coincidentally yesterday, you know, about India saying that Mumbai is going to be underwater in another 3 decades, I think, something like that. So I think Singapore is possibly even sooner, because we are just an island. So the thing is, these are environment threat that has been going on, and I think as designer, we play a very strong part in it. I mean, amid the pandemic right now, you know, we have a more dire situation, but of course these are things that we always have to put under our plate, you know, as a responsible designer. Yeah, I think I better leave the time for the rest of the panelists.
Thank you, Keat. I think it's always a struggle as a designer, that you have to juggle between the creative, and then you've got constraints of the budget, there's the code, there's the timeline and all. And of course, it's always coming up with the best solution that we can. Maybe I can invite Ms. Shilpa Gore to maybe chip in. Is there any issue or things that you think, from your perspective, the designer can contribute or should try to address better as a fraternity?
Absolutely. I think I agree with what has been said before. And I think as design professionals today, we have been taught, and we have the skills and the ability to have patience, to have curiosity, to have empathy, to be problem solvers. And I think our need is there more than ever, in fact, today, to help come up with newer solutions to the sustainability issues, etc. In fact, there is this one thing that has always been on my mind. I don't know if it happens in Singapore too, but when you come up with a new job, invariably there is a lot of waste from the earlier place that is created, like a lot of old furniture and desks and beds and cupboards, and everything just goes into the garbage. And
Dumpster,
one wonders,
right? Yeah.
yes. So I just wonder sometimes whether platforms like SIDS and IIT can both create, I think, something like a circulating library, you know, but this library is for objects. And with so much of affordable housing now coming up, I'm sure there is a need for a lot of furniture that can be recycled. And I think that's one way to go. Or that clients always come with their own aspirations, and fairly so. But I think it's time we can possibly educate them about how to use lesser water by using the right kind of taps and the fittings and the showers, etc. Or also by using ventilating the space in such a way that you avoid using mechanical systems and you can rely on natural light and ventilation. So that's one way to go for us, yes.
Cool, thank you. I think I agree with you on the part of education. And I think recently in Singapore, there were some companies, because of COVID, they closed down. And it's a karaoke shop. And what they did is that all the old furniture, they actually donated it to nursing homes or to elderly centers. So I think it also takes an enlightened client to want to do so. And sometimes in Singapore, at least, it's cheaper to use a new, just to buy the new product in a new laminate, as opposed to recycle, because you have to treat it, there's additional labor and work as well. So I think, of course, there's the role of the designer, but there's also about education, right? Educating our clients, educating our contractors, Absolutely. So that there's also buy-in. Much easier for you to convince your client if they are an enlightened client as well. Maybe we move on to Hwee. Hwee, any thoughts, especially because your background, you have been working in exhibition design, and we know, sometimes exhibition, it's there for 3 months, and then after the exhibition, all the plywood and everything, you just tie it down and it moves on. But any thoughts based on your own experience?
Yes, as much as we can, I think the materials can be reused. As much as we can, we would like to have them reused. Of course, then that takes up space in the storage and all that. Addressing the points that you mentioned earlier regarding the current situation and in this pandemic situation around the world, staying in, like everyone under the same roof, I think it's one of the things that is happening all over the world. and everyone and the family is staying in. I think what we should be looking at as designers now is also to have the home multitasking, allowing different activities to be happening at the home at the same time, as well as bring the outdoors indoors, right? And allowing the home to cater for different aspects of usage. And from in that sense, in that particular sense, we can also have then recycled materials used as an outdoor facilities or as part of the indoor materials. I think recycling education is a very important topic to actually go into. We should start educating the younger generation designers in this aspect, and how we can actually recycle materials to reuse them. To reuse them in our projects.
Thanks, Hwee. There's some comments from our participants. They're talking about certain frameworks like the LEAD program, right? In Singapore, we have what we call the Green Mark. And I think hopefully we also want to push it beyond just a set of criteria that people want to checklist and tick it off, but really truly understand and really have the heart and the intent as a starting point to really recycle, to reuse, and to just be aware that, you know, we're all interconnected. Whatever happens in India, in Singapore, the sea, it's a common sea for everyone. The forest, if the forest burns down in Indonesia, it affects Singapore. I think the last haze parts of it even went further as well. Maybe to our keynote speakers, Pinkish or Peter, is there anything you want to add on to this in terms of any other issues beyond the things that you've already covered in your presentation today?
I'd just like to add kind of one thing. I think a lot of us, base our practices and primarily a lot of our education comes from, looking at the masters and everything that happened post-industrialization in some sense. And what we seem to forget is that at the core of what modern design's aims was a certain kind of social responsibility. They were building for a huge number of people after the war who didn't have homes, who didn't have, good places to work in, live in, and all of that, which over time we kind of seem to have forgotten. And I think that it's time we kind of shifted the compass back to that as designers, that's extremely important. I mean, even, just to give an example, we all revere, famous designers like Charles and Reims and the kind of bend ply chairs that they did and all of that. But the bend ply technology was actually invented for the army, which they needed splints for people, soldiers who had actually kind of broken their limbs and to kind of actually, stiffen them. So it's the designer's search for a solution for a need, which was then converted to a piece of furniture, which then became a brand, which became, a high selling kind of value. But at the real heart of it was a sense of social responsibility to solve that problem. So I think the pandemic has shown us all kind of exposed, in some sense, and we need to kind of find our bearings again, I think. And I think we need to do it not by kind of doing a lot of things we do. I think beauty, for example, is central to our existence. It's as much of a human need, to kind of feed our soul in some sense, as against all other functional, pragmatic things. But so we need to find ways to kind of be responsible, but still kind of feed our quest for kind of the good things and the beautiful things in life, It's about balance for me.
Thanks, Pinkish. I think I agree. I think it's about really shifting and looking at our priorities. Peter, do you have anything to add? If not, it's okay. I can move on to the next question. Yeah, okay. So in view of time, I'm going to merge some of the questions. We have some interesting questions from the panel, from our participants today. And since we're talking about, Singapore is facing similar issues in India and we have similar strategies, it appears, to design. One of the questions is that, Singapore is multiracial, And in India, you know, it's so diverse. There are so many different languages, so many different gods as well. How do you see interior or architecture as a means to collaborate, right, or to build towards a new normal? Are there areas in Singapore and India that we could collaborate on together, right, or cross over or share in terms of developing for moving forward together as well? Yeah. Any thoughts from the panel?
I think, yeah, Shilpa here. I
Yes,
think,
Shilpa.
yes, of course, we are a diverse country with diverse cultures and everything, and so is Singapore. But at the root of it all, we are humans with the same notions, the same feelings, the same aspirations, the same fears, and the same wants. So I think that's what binds us all together, and that's what will, and hence this whole kind of platform where there is learning happening between the countries can go forward. We should wait to see what each one is coming up with and set directions for the new future now.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. I think if we pull it back to the design philosophy that we've been hearing today about well-being, it's not just the look and feel, but, you know, and the function, but it's also about the mental well-being, right? And of course, we sort of realize if I'm cooped up at home for weeks on end, everyone goes a bit crazy and they start growing plants, they start cooking. At least that's what's happening in Singapore. We've got a lot of new green fingers and new urban gardens on our balcony. So I'm not sure if that's what's happening in India as well. And I've got a lot of friends who started baking, and then there's all these food drops, right? And then extra muffins, extra cakes. Yeah. Maybe anything from the panel?
Can come in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Jabeen?
Yeah, Miss, maybe Jabeen first?
Can I?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
When we look from today's point of view, maybe there might be a lot of difference the way within India itself, all the races, and even in Singapore, we might be a little different. But go back 50 years, we were almost same. Like, you know, we were more sincere, more earnest, and more truthful in our expressions. So actually, I think one great exercise which Singapore and India can do together, particularly from the platforms of IIID and SIDS, is to explore our vernacular architecture. How these two countries kind of responded to the need of the tropics, air, water, wind, fire, or the heat, all these things. How did we manage? There were no air conditioners, there were no kind of mechanical solutions then to this extent. Yet they were all more satisfied with their lives, maybe cool and comfortable also. So I think if we can kind of, like we always say, there are 5 elements: air, water, fire, okay? So if we can kind of identify 5 structures, which we can actually think of as lighthouses for us to learn from. We in India, we will also kind of identify such buildings. For example, we have the beautiful Pattanamapuram Palace in Kerala, and also Ahmedabad, where we have the deep step wells. So water, breeze, all these things, how did the earlier generation tame and make it useful for ourselves? So if we can kind of compare those vernacular lessons and notes, that will be huge insight to who we are and what we can do together. And most of these problems which we face today may also kind of be able to, you know, solve when you go back, learn, and then apply it in a suitable way.
It sounds like we have to organize a trip to India and then cross over a trip to Singapore to visit all these case studies, so that I always tell my students, it's one thing to look at the image, but you have to be there to understand the humidity, what is the shade, what's the experience of standing in that space. And I agree completely. I think it's really about not only going back mentally, but going back into our history, into our lineage. Peter had earlier talked about, you know, vernacular, tropical architecture. And I think even in Singapore as a movement, we looked at how from the shop house, right, from quintessential from a Chinese sort of typology adapted to the tropics. And then there's evolution. So Carrie Hill, for example, had also developed new ways to approach ventilation, cross ventilation and all. So I think it's really important to not just look at the easy solutions. You know, we can always put sun shading, we can always put aircon to overcome whatever constraints we have. But then it's true, what are some of these strategies that have worked so well, but yet we seem to have forgotten some of these as well. Keat, you were about to mention something earlier on as well.
In fact, this from personal experience. In fact, last 2 years, I've been working with one of the furniture brand he's in Singapore. It's a furniture brand in India, but they are originally from India. So he has an arts and crafts center. I mean, he refused for me to call it factory. So it's an arts and crafts center in Uttar Pradesh at the mouth of Himalaya. So in fact, we are working together, and I mean, he has enlightened me a lot of things from the Indian perspective, because I have a few offices in China, so I was used to the very clinical kind of perfection, you know, in some of different process and things. He showed me the kind of work that he has done, you know, with his brass work, the artisanship of how handmade furniture. And my work, on the other hand, is on the other polarity, because my work is all very sci-fi inspired, you know. So somehow I came up with the word, you know, when we were working together on a series of furniture, as an artisan tech. So it's an artisan and technology. So we decided to go in that movement, but at this point I can't share some images because it's still under embargo, under the brand. So it's very, I make use of I wouldn't say primitive, but at least in the artisan handcrafted method into kind of design to create the kind of new series of furniture. So in the end, I think it was quite well received by the investors, and I think that's the kind of chemistry that I really enjoyed, you know. So different culture with different thinking coming together, and it may create something of a really good concoction, you know. Yeah, so I think this is a kind of chemistry I think we can continue to develop. And in fact, I think the factory in Uttar Pradesh, the Arts and Crafts Center, they are in fact trying to encourage Singapore designers, you know, who are interested to take, you know, even internship or even a shared office kind of experience, you know. But unfortunately, the idea was supposed to take place earlier this year, before the whole travel restriction and things like that. So now he has to take a short hiatus until the whole pandemic cleared up. Yeah.
Thanks, Keat. I think it's while we're talking about craft and workmanship and all, I'm going to squeeze in one last question, so please indulge me. I think it's quite heartening to see that through the projects in India, there's a lot of emphasis on craft, tradition, and the modern translation back and adaptation into the spaces. I think unfortunately in Singapore, we seem to be losing some of these craftsmanship. Even our carpenters, you know, during the lockdown, our carpenters or factories which are in Johor Bahru in Malaysia, then suddenly there's a cut off, you know, there are no skilled craftsmen in Singapore because everyone is stuck in their respective country. So there's a question here from our participants about, you know, does software limit experimentation with materials and new concepts? So at least in Singapore, we do find that there's a loss of those crafts. I'm not sure in India, do you also face a similar challenge? And with these new techniques of, you know, prototyping, 3D printers, do you find that there is a limit? So is technology a hindrance, or do you see technology as an aid moving forward for interior designers? To the panel, if anyone. I see Pinkish nodding, so maybe Pinkish.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, and I kind of found it, I think the answer is in what Keat was also talking about, that it's this merging between two things. You know, for too long, we've seen these things as being binaries, they're oppositional. And it does not need to be like that. I mean, there's no reason why the traditional and the kind of high tech cannot come together, you know, I mean, and I think there are some experiments that are being carried out in India on a much kind of smaller scale by a lot of young architects and designers who have this exposure to kind of the computational kind of side of things. as well as have been exposed to traditional systems of knowledge and making. So I think that in the few years kind of going forth, we're going to see a lot of things coming out of the country, because we are at this strange kind of situation where we have both. We've not lost our completely artisanal kind of handmade skills, and we've got adequate computer aided machining and production kind of techniques which are there. So we are just at that cusp, according to me, where we will see interesting kind of innovations beginning to happen. But for me, yeah, it's not kind of this duality. We have to start thinking of it as a continuation of the same thing. I mean, no vernacular in the world was a static vernacular. People have always evolved. I mean, based on what new material or need the kind of environment has posed to you, lay people using common sense have always innovated and evolved. And I think we need to just do that. We need to be part of that kind of lineage, to start being constantly innovative. We don't need to kind of become static, nostalgic individuals in that sense.
Agree completely. I think we're really in this transitional phase, and I think COVID-19 has accelerated some of this. And if you think about it, traditionally, when Singapore and India were both British colonies, the conduit was the colonial government, right? In terms of administration, in terms of bringing order over certain styles. So there are always all these influences. So perhaps the conduit now is really, the digitization, the digital world. So that would be something to look forward to. I'm going to close because I think we're slightly tight on time. But there's some comments about or questions asking about future collaborations between India and Singapore. Will there be workshops? So maybe I think for sure there will be these possibilities. I'm sure SIDS and IIID will work together, and just keep a lookout. Keep a lookout on this space. Maybe there'll be virtual tours if we can't travel. Maybe there'll be workshops that we can sign up and all. So I really want to thank everyone. I want to thank our Indian and Singaporean speakers and panelists really for the sharing and the thoughts. I think it's quite amazing that we can learn so much in a short 2 hours, but Peter has brought us all over the world. And then Pinkish has brought us to India, and really we get to see so many different aspects. So really thank you to everyone. And now I think we'd like to do a group photo. So if I can ask the panelists to please on the cameras, and we'll just do a group shot, and you can smile for the camera just to document our first inaugural collaboration, right? So maybe on the count of 1, 2, and 3, smile. Maybe just one more, 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. So also a special thanks to our webinar participants today, I think for spending the 2 hours, and I hope that people have really picked up a lot of insights, and I think I have learned a lot about the way and the approach, right, between the two countries. And it's interesting to see that though there are similarities and differences, but I think at the heart of it, we're human, and we have similar needs. If you talk about Corbusier and we talk about ergonomics, there are these commonalities and similarities that hold us together. So I'm really looking forward. I hope that, we have news of these workshops or whichever means of collaboration. So Zhi Jie here signing out for today's webinar. I'd like to thank everyone once again. So please keep safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you. Goodbye. Thank you.